In January 1848, a single glittering piece of metal was discovered beside a quiet river in California. Within months, hundreds of thousands of people abandoned their homes, crossed deserts, sailed dangerous oceans, and risked everything for a chance to become rich. Many never returned. What began as a tiny discovery would change America forever. The winter morning was cold and quiet in the foothills of California's Sierra Nevada mountains. Mist drifted above the water of the American River as workers prepared for another long day. At first glance, nothing about the landscape suggested that history was about to change. The land seemed untouched and endless. Tall pine trees covered the hills. Rivers cut through valleys that had existed for thousands of years. Native American communities had lived there long before outsiders arrived. For generations they hunted, fished, and built lives connected to the land. But now California was entering a new era. Only days earlier, the United States had secured California following the end of the Mexican-American War. The territory remained distant and largely unknown to most Americans living in the eastern states. To many people in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, California seemed almost mythical, a remote frontier at the edge of the continent. One of the men helping shape that frontier was a Swiss immigrant named John Sutter. Sutter had arrived years earlier with ambitious dreams. He imagined building a prosperous agricultural empire in the fertile Sacramento Valley. Through determination, negotiation, and opportunity, he established a settlement known as New Helvetia. His holdings grew larger every year. Fields produced crops. Livestock multiplied. Workers constructed buildings. Trade expanded. Yet Sutter faced a problem. His growing enterprise required lumber. Large quantities of timber were needed for construction projects throughout the region. To solve this issue, he partnered with a skilled carpenter named James W. Marshall. Marshall was practical, hardworking, and experienced in construction. Together they planned a sawmill near the American River. The location offered a reliable source of water power that could drive machinery. Throughout 1847, workers labored tirelessly. Trees were cut. Logs were transported. Channels were dug. The mill slowly took shape. No one involved expected that their construction project would become one of the most famous sights in American history. On the morning of January 24, 1848, Marshall inspected the mill race, the channel carrying water to power the sawmill. As water flowed through the channel, it washed away dirt and gravel. Something unusual caught his eye. Tiny metallic flakes sparkled in the sunlight. Marshall bent down. He picked up one of the pieces. It looked different from ordinary rock. Curious, he collected several more. The metal gleamed with a distinctive yellow color. Could it be gold? Marshall performed simple tests. He hammered the material. It flattened instead of shattering. He examined its shine. He considered its weight. The evidence pointed toward an extraordinary conclusion. He hurried to share the discovery with Sutter. When Marshall arrived, excitement mixed with uncertainty. Neither man immediately understood the full significance of what they had found. In fact, their first reaction was concern. Sutter feared that news of gold would destroy his labor force. Workers might abandon farms, workshops, and construction projects in search of wealth. He was right. But neither man yet realized how completely their world would change. For a short time they attempted to keep the discovery secret. This proved impossible. Workers talked. Visitors noticed unusual behavior. Rumors spread from settlement to settlement. Within weeks, whispers traveled across California. Gold. Gold in the American River. Gold near Sutter's mill. At first many people doubted the stories. Frontier regions were filled with rumors and exaggerations. Yet curiosity continued growing. Small groups traveled to investigate. Many returned carrying samples. The rumors became facts. Gold really existed. By spring of 1848, excitement spread throughout Northern California. Farmers left fields unattended. Sailors deserted ships. Shopkeepers closed businesses. blacksmiths abandoned workshops. Everyone seemed to be heading toward the rivers. Some found gold immediately. Others searched unsuccessfully for weeks. Still, stories of success dominated conversations. One miner might discover enough gold dust in a single day to earn more money than months of ordinary labor. Such stories fueled dreams. The gold fields became crowded. Tents appeared along riverbanks. Makeshift camps expanded rapidly. Trails filled with travelers carrying tools, supplies, and hope. Yet the greatest wave of migration had not even begun. Most Americans living in the eastern United States still knew little about the discovery. Communication across the continent remained slow. There were no transcontinental railroads. Telegraphs did not yet connect the distant regions. News traveled by ship, horse, and printed newspapers. Months passed before reliable reports reached major eastern cities. When they did, many readers reacted with skepticism. The claims seemed unbelievable. Newspapers described rivers rich with gold. Letters reported easy fortunes. Witnesses spoke of nuggets lying in streambeds. Surely these accounts were exaggerated. Then came confirmation from the highest level of government. In December 1848, President James K. Polk addressed Congress. He confirmed that significant quantities of gold had been discovered in California. The announcement transformed curiosity into a national obsession. Across America, ordinary people faced difficult choices. Farmers considered leaving family farms. Merchants thought about abandoning businesses. Young men dreamed of adventure. Immigrants saw opportunity. Veterans sought fresh beginnings. The possibility of sudden wealth captured imaginations everywhere. A shopkeeper in Ohio might spend evenings studying maps. A laborer in Pennsylvania might calculate travel expenses. A sailor in Massachusetts might plan a voyage around South America. The same question echoed throughout the nation. What if I find gold? For some, the answer seemed worth any risk. The journey to California was neither easy nor safe. Travelers generally chose one of three routes. The first involved crossing the continent by wagon. This route stretched thousands of miles through plains, deserts, rivers, and mountains. The second required sailing around the southern tip of South America near Cape Horn. The voyage was long and dangerous. Storms frequently battered ships in those waters. The third route crossed the Isthmus of Panama. Travelers sailed to Central America, crossed dense tropical terrain, then boarded another ship bound for California. Each route presented serious challenges. Disease, accidents, extreme weather, food shortages, financial ruin. Yet none of these dangers stopped the growing tide of migration. By 1849, the movement reached extraordinary levels. Thousands upon thousands headed west. Because so many arrived during that year, they became known as the 49ers. The name entered American history. The 49ers came from every background imaginable. Some were educated professionals. Others were farmers. Some possessed significant savings. Others risked everything they owned. Many traveled alone. Others joined relatives or friends. All shared a common dream: gold. For every person who imagined riches, reality would prove more complicated. California's gold fields were places of opportunity but also disappointment. Fortunes were won. Fortunes were lost. Lives were transformed. Lives were destroyed. Many who arrived expecting easy wealth discovered exhausting labor instead. Mining demanded strength, patience, and endurance. Days began before sunrise. Workers stood in cold rivers. They shoveled gravel. They lifted heavy loads. They searched endlessly for precious particles hidden among ordinary stones. Success was never guaranteed. Still, hope remained powerful. Each handful of gravel might contain treasure. As camps expanded, entirely new communities emerged. Tents became streets. Streets became towns. Towns became cities. The transformation occurred with astonishing speed. Among the places experiencing dramatic growth was the small settlement of San Francisco. Before the gold discovery, San Francisco contained only a few hundred residents. Then the rush began. Ships crowded the harbor. Immigrants arrived from around the world. Businesses multiplied. Construction accelerated. Within only a few years, San Francisco became one of America's fastest-growing cities. The gold rush was no longer simply a mining story. It was becoming a story about migration, ambition, and the rapid transformation of an entire region. And this was only the beginning. Far beyond California, millions of people were hearing the same astonishing reports. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in Europe, newspapers carried stories of opportunity. In Latin America, adventurers prepared journeys northward. In Asia, hopeful travelers considered crossing the Pacific. The California gold rush was becoming a global event. The world was moving toward California. And California would never be the same again. By the beginning of 1849, America seemed to be under a spell. In cities, villages, farms, and frontier settlements, conversations repeatedly returned to the same subject: California gold. Newspapers printed sensational headlines. Letters from the West circulated among families and friends. Stories grew larger with every retelling. One man claimed he had collected enough gold in a few weeks to buy a large farm back east. Another insisted that nuggets the size of chicken eggs could be picked up from riverbanks. Many of these stories were exaggerated. Some were completely false. Yet enough truth existed to make people believe. For thousands of Americans, California represented more than gold. It represented a chance to escape poverty. A chance to start over. A chance to achieve dreams that seemed impossible in their ordinary lives. One cold morning in Missouri, a young farmer named Thomas stared across his family's small property. Years of hard work had produced little reward. Poor harvests and debts had made life difficult. Now California filled his thoughts. He had never seen a mountain larger than a hill. He had never traveled more than a few hundred miles from home. Yet he found himself preparing for a journey that would stretch across an entire continent. Thomas was not alone. Throughout the spring of 1849, wagon trains gathered along the western frontier. Families sold belongings. Tools were purchased. Animals were loaded. Food supplies were packed carefully. The travelers knew they faced dangers. Still, most believed the risks were worth taking. The overland trail was long and unforgiving. From Missouri to California, travelers faced nearly 2,000 miles of wilderness. There were no modern highways, no gas stations, no emergency services, no reliable maps for much of the route. Every mile demanded determination. The first weeks often seemed encouraging. The vast Great Plains stretched toward the horizon. Grasslands rolled beneath endless skies. Buffalo herds occasionally appeared in the distance. Campfires illuminated the night. Families gathered together. Songs echoed across the prairie. Hope remained strong. But the journey quickly became harder. Summer heat intensified. Dust filled the air. Water sources became scarce. Animals weakened. Wagons broke down. Minor problems often turned into major crises. A broken wheel could delay an entire group. A sick ox could threaten survival. A contaminated water source could spread disease. Travelers soon learned that reaching California required more than courage. It required endurance. One diary described days when temperatures became unbearable. Men walked beside wagons because animals were too exhausted to pull additional weight. Women cared for children while enduring heat, dust, and constant uncertainty. Everyone worked. Everyone suffered. Yet they continued west. As the months passed, the landscape changed. The fertile plains gave way to harsher terrain. Mountains rose in the distance. Deserts appeared. The route became increasingly difficult. Many travelers had underestimated the challenge. Some had packed too many possessions. Others had brought insufficient food. Mistakes made at the beginning of the journey became costly later. Along the trail, graves appeared. Simple markers reminded travelers of the dangers surrounding them. Cholera spread through some wagon trains. Accidents claimed lives. Exhaustion took its toll. Not everyone reached California. Yet thousands continued moving forward. The dream remained alive. Meanwhile, another wave of fortune seekers chose a different route. On the East Coast, crowded ships prepared for voyages around South America. Passengers packed tightly into limited spaces. Conditions aboard many vessels were uncomfortable. Cabins were small. Food quality varied. Storms frequently disrupted travel. The voyage around Cape Horn was among the longest sea journeys in the world. Ships often spent months at sea. Powerful winds battered wooden vessels. Massive waves crashed across decks. Crew members worked tirelessly to keep ships afloat. Passengers frequently became seasick. Some began questioning their decision. But turning back was impossible. The ocean offered only one direction: forward. Near the southern tip of South America, conditions became especially dangerous. Cape Horn had earned a fearsome reputation among sailors. Powerful currents collided. Storm systems developed rapidly. Many ships had been lost there. Every successful passage felt like a victory. When vessels finally entered the Pacific Ocean, relief spread throughout the ship. California seemed closer. Yet weeks of travel still remained. A third group chose the Panama route. This path appeared shorter but carried its own dangers. Travelers sailed to Central America and then crossed dense tropical regions. The climate shocked many Americans. Humidity felt overwhelming. Insects were everywhere. Disease threatened constantly. Rivers had to be crossed. Supplies had to be carried through difficult terrain. Many travelers became ill. Yet the route remained popular because it reduced travel time. After reaching the Pacific coast, passengers boarded another ship for California. When they finally arrived, they often found themselves exhausted but determined. By late 1849, California was receiving people from across the globe. Americans arrived from nearly every state. Mexicans came north. Chileans crossed the Pacific. Chinese immigrants began arriving in increasing numbers. Europeans traveled from distant nations. The goldfields became one of the most diverse places in the world. Different languages filled the air. Different cultures met along riverbanks and in mining camps. Some interactions were friendly. Others produced conflict. Competition for gold could create tension. Yet the rush continued. New arrivals often experienced shock when they first saw California. The reality differed from their expectations. Instead of easy riches, they encountered crowded camps and fierce competition. Mining locations that had once been quiet were now packed with workers. Rivers were lined with tents. Hillsides contained thousands of hopeful prospectors. Everywhere, people searched for gold. Many newcomers immediately purchased mining equipment. Picks, shovels, pans, cradles, sluice boxes. Prices were astonishingly high. A simple shovel might cost many times its normal value. Food was expensive. Clothing was expensive. Housing was expensive. Everything cost more because demand exceeded supply. Ironically, some of the people becoming richest were not miners. They were merchants. Store owners sold tools and supplies. Transport operators moved goods. Hotel owners rented rooms. Restaurant operators fed hungry workers. These businesses often earned more reliable profits than mining itself. A young entrepreneur named Levi Strauss arrived during this era. Like many others, he recognized opportunity. Rather than searching for gold directly, he supplied miners with durable goods. Years later, his name would become famous throughout the world. The goldfields themselves remained places of uncertainty. One miner might work for months without success. Another might discover a valuable deposit unexpectedly. Luck played an enormous role. Stories of sudden wealth spread rapidly. A miner finding a large nugget became camp gossip within hours. Crowds gathered to see impressive discoveries. Hopes surged once again. If he found gold, people thought, perhaps I will too. Yet for every success story, countless disappointments remained hidden. Many miners earned barely enough to survive. Some spent more on supplies than they recovered from mining. Others eventually abandoned the search and returned home. The dream of easy wealth often collided with harsh reality. Still, California continued changing. Roads expanded. Businesses multiplied. Ports became busier. Agriculture developed. Entire towns appeared almost overnight. The gold rush was creating an economic revolution. And beneath all the excitement, another transformation was occurring. The balance of power within the United States was beginning to shift. California was becoming too important to remain merely a distant territory. Its growing population and economic significance would soon force national leaders to make critical decisions. The discovery at Sutter's mill had started as a local event. Now it was reshaping the future of an entire nation. And the greatest changes were still ahead. By the summer of 1849, California no longer resembled the remote frontier that had existed only a few years earlier. The transformation was astonishing. What had once been quiet valleys and scattered settlements were now filled with thousands upon thousands of newcomers. Every road seemed crowded. Every riverbank contained miners. Every harbor welcomed arriving ships. The gold rush had become one of the largest migrations in American history. For many travelers, the first sight of San Francisco was unforgettable. Ships filled the harbor from horizon to horizon. Masts rose above the water like a forest of wooden poles. The city seemed alive with energy. Workers unloaded cargo. Merchants shouted prices. Passengers rushed toward the docks. Construction occurred everywhere. Only a few years earlier, San Francisco had been a small settlement. Now it was growing faster than anyone imagined possible. The harbor revealed one of the strangest sights in America. Hundreds of ships sat abandoned. Their crews had deserted them. Sailors who arrived in California often heard stories about gold before they even stepped onto shore. Many immediately left their vessels and headed for the mining regions. Captains desperately searched for replacement crews. Some never found them. As a result, abandoned ships remained anchored in the harbor. A few eventually became warehouses. Others became hotels. Some were converted into businesses. The city adapted to every available resource. Nothing was wasted. The demand for buildings was so great that construction never seemed to stop. New businesses appeared every week. Hotels opened. Restaurants expanded. General stores multiplied. Banks emerged. Entertainment venues attracted crowds. Fortunes were being made far from the gold fields. Among the busiest locations were the supply stores. Miners needed everything: food, clothing, tools, boots, blankets, medicine. Because demand was enormous, prices reached extraordinary levels. An egg could cost what an entire meal cost back east. A shovel might sell for many times its normal price. Simple necessities became valuable commodities. Merchants who understood supply and demand often prospered. Some earned more money than successful miners. One businessman noticed that miners constantly complained about their clothing. Ordinary trousers tore easily during difficult work. Mining was rough. Workers climbed rocks, carried heavy loads, stood in rivers for hours. Clothing wore out quickly. The businessman, Levi Strauss, helped create durable work pants that became extremely popular. Decades later, his products would become famous worldwide. Meanwhile, beyond San Francisco, the mining camps continued expanding. Some camps appeared almost overnight. A rich gold discovery attracted prospectors. Tents appeared first. Then wooden buildings followed. Businesses opened. Streets formed. Soon a bustling town existed where wilderness had stood only months before. Yet many of these towns remained temporary. Their futures depended entirely on gold. As long as discoveries continued, the towns thrived. When the gold disappeared, many communities vanished. These became known as ghost towns. At their peak, however, they were crowded, noisy, and exciting places. Life in a mining camp was rarely comfortable. Most miners lived in tents or simple wooden shelters. Winters could be cold and wet. Summers could be extremely hot. Food quality varied greatly. Fresh vegetables were often difficult to obtain. Many meals consisted of beans, salted meat, bread, and coffee. Medical care remained limited. Injuries were common. Diseases spread easily. Yet despite these hardships, people remained optimistic. The possibility of striking it rich kept hope alive. Each morning, miners headed towards streams and rivers carrying their equipment. The simplest method involved panning. Workers scooped gravel into metal pans and washed away lighter material. If they were lucky, tiny flakes of gold remained. The process required patience. Hours of labor often produced only small results. As easily accessible gold became harder to find, mining methods evolved. Teams of workers constructed larger systems. Sluice boxes increased efficiency. Water channels redirected rivers. Companies invested money in more sophisticated operations. Mining was gradually becoming a business rather than an individual adventure. This change created winners and losers. Large operations often earned greater profits. Independent miners struggled to compete. The era of easy discoveries slowly faded. Yet stories of incredible finds continued. One miner discovered a nugget worth thousands of dollars. Another unearthed enough gold to transform his entire life. Newspaper reports celebrated these successes. Readers across America remained fascinated. The legends grew. For many people, California became a symbol of limitless opportunity. But not everyone benefited equally. Native American communities faced devastating consequences. Long before gold seekers arrived, indigenous peoples had lived throughout California. The gold rush brought enormous disruption. Traditional lands were invaded. Resources disappeared. Violence increased. Diseases spread. Entire communities suffered greatly. For many Native Americans, the gold rush represented tragedy rather than opportunity. Their experiences became one of the darkest chapters of this period. Immigrants from other nations also encountered challenges. Many Chinese miners arrived hoping to build better lives. They worked hard and often achieved success. However, they frequently faced discrimination and hostility. The same was true for many Latin American and European immigrants. Competition for resources sometimes fueled prejudice and conflict. California's rapid growth created both opportunity and tension. Different cultures met under difficult circumstances. Sometimes cooperation emerged. Other times, divisions deepened. Despite these problems, immigration continued increasing. People from around the world still believed California offered possibilities unavailable elsewhere. Meanwhile, political leaders in Washington watched events carefully. The population explosion could not be ignored. California's economy was expanding rapidly. Its strategic importance was growing. National leaders recognized that major decisions lay ahead. Should California become a state? If so, would it enter the Union as a free state or a slave state? These questions carried enormous consequences. At the time, tensions between free and slave states were already rising across the United States. Every new state affected the balance of political power. California's future would influence national politics. The issue became increasingly urgent as more settlers arrived. Back in the mining camps, most prospectors paid little attention to political debates. Their focus remained on gold. Every day brought new rumors. A rich strike here. A valuable discovery there. Excitement spread quickly. Hope never disappeared completely. Even miners who had failed repeatedly often refused to quit. Tomorrow might be different. Tomorrow might bring the discovery that changed everything. And occasionally it did. Yet beneath the optimism, a reality was becoming clear. The greatest fortunes of the gold rush were not always found in rivers. Some were being built in cities. Some were created through business. Some emerged through transportation, banking, and trade. California's economy was becoming larger than gold itself. The discovery at Sutter's mill had started a chain reaction. Now entire industries were forming. Railroads would eventually follow. Agriculture would expand. Cities would continue growing. The gold rush was laying the foundation for California's future prosperity. But before that future arrived, the nation would face a political storm. A storm that threatened to divide America itself. And California would stand at the center of it. By 1850, the California gold rush had become far more than a search for precious metal. What began as a discovery along a river had transformed an entire region. The population was exploding. New towns appeared almost monthly. Businesses flourished. Trade expanded. The economy grew at an astonishing pace. California was no longer a distant frontier. It was becoming one of the most important regions in the United States. Yet this rapid growth created a difficult question. What should California become? A territory could only remain a territory for so long. With hundreds of thousands of settlers arriving, California needed a more permanent political status. Many residents wanted statehood. They wanted representation. They wanted a stronger government. They wanted stability. The issue seemed straightforward. But in Washington, it quickly became controversial. The United States was already struggling with deep divisions over slavery. For decades, leaders had attempted to maintain a balance between free states and slave states. Each side feared losing political influence. Every new state shifted that balance. California's admission threatened to upset the fragile system. Many Northerners supported California entering the Union as a free state. Many Southerners worried about losing power in Congress. Debates grew intense. Politicians argued. Newspapers published passionate opinions. Citizens across the country followed developments closely. Some feared that disagreements over California could eventually tear the nation apart. They were not entirely wrong. The tensions surrounding California were part of a larger conflict that would eventually lead to the American Civil War. For the moment, however, leaders searched for compromise. One of the most influential figures involved in these negotiations was Henry Clay. Clay believed that compromise could preserve national unity. He worked alongside other political leaders to develop a plan. The result became known as the Compromise of 1850. The agreement addressed several major issues facing the nation. Among its provisions, California would enter the Union as a free state. The decision carried enormous significance. On September 9, 1850, California officially became the 31st state of the United States. The moment marked a major milestone. Only 2 years earlier, the region had been a sparsely populated frontier. Now it was a state. The speed of its transformation amazed observers throughout the world. For many Californians, statehood represented progress and legitimacy. Government institutions expanded. Courts became more organized. Infrastructure projects received greater attention. The state continued developing rapidly. Yet while political leaders celebrated, life in the goldfields remained challenging. The easiest gold deposits were disappearing. Miners who had arrived early often enjoyed advantages. Late arrivals faced increasing difficulties. Finding gold required more effort than before. Simple panning methods were often insufficient. As a result, mining operations became larger and more expensive. Companies began investing substantial amounts of money. Heavy equipment appeared. Water systems expanded. Workers were hired in greater numbers. Mining was evolving from individual prospecting into industrial production. This shift changed the nature of the gold rush. Independent miners found it harder to compete. Some adapted by joining partnerships. Others found employment with larger companies. Many left mining entirely. The dream of instant wealth became less realistic. Still, thousands remained hopeful. Every year brought new discoveries. Fresh mining districts opened. Rumors of hidden riches continued spreading. Hope remained one of California's most valuable resources. Meanwhile, the state's cities kept growing. Among them, Sacramento experienced remarkable expansion. Located near important transportation routes, Sacramento became a major commercial center. Goods flowed through the city. Miners purchased supplies there. Merchants conducted business. Government officials established offices. The city's influence increased steadily. Elsewhere, San Francisco continued its extraordinary rise. Its population expanded rapidly. Banks financed new ventures. Shipping companies connected California to global markets. Entrepreneurs built fortunes. The city increasingly resembled a major international port. Visitors often struggled to believe how quickly it had developed. Only a few years earlier, such growth would have seemed impossible. The gold rush also transformed transportation. Before 1848, reaching California had been extremely difficult. Now demand for faster travel intensified. People wanted better routes. Businesses wanted more efficient ways to move goods. Investors recognized opportunities. Roads improved. Steamship services expanded. Plans for future rail connections gained support. The movement of people and products became a central part of California's economic success. Agriculture also benefited. Many miners required food. Supplying them created enormous opportunities for farmers. Fields expanded. Ranches grew larger. Agricultural production increased dramatically. Some farmers earned steady profits while miners faced uncertainty. Over time, agriculture would become one of California's most important industries. Not everyone prospered, however. Many fortune seekers never found significant gold. Some exhausted their savings. Others accumulated debt. A number returned home disappointed. The journey had cost them years of effort with little reward. Their stories rarely appeared in newspapers. Success attracted attention. Failure often remained invisible. Yet these experiences were common. Historians estimate that relatively few miners achieved extraordinary wealth. Many earned modest incomes. Some barely survived. The reality of the gold rush differed significantly from the legends. Still, the legends persisted. Stories of dramatic discoveries captured imaginations. They became part of American culture. The gold rush symbolized ambition, risk, and opportunity. It represented the belief that ordinary people could change their destinies. This belief influenced generations. Even decades later, Americans continued telling stories about brave prospectors seeking fortune in the West. The gold rush also attracted international attention. Observers in Europe, Asia, and Latin America watched California's growth with fascination. The region became a symbol of possibility. Immigration continued. New communities formed. Cultural diversity expanded. California's population became increasingly global. As the 1850s progressed, however, another reality emerged. The easy years were ending. The first phase of the gold rush was fading. Mining continued, but conditions were changing. Large companies dominated many operations. Competition intensified. The frontier atmosphere slowly evolved into something more structured. California was becoming a mature society rather than a temporary boom region. Yet the impact of those early years remained profound. The gold rush had reshaped geography. It had altered migration patterns. It had accelerated economic growth. It had influenced national politics. And it had helped propel the United States toward a future few could have imagined. But even greater changes were approaching. Within a decade, the nation would face civil war. The conflict would test the very survival of the Union. And the wealth generated during the gold rush would play an important role in determining the country's future. By the mid-1850s, the wild excitement of the early gold rush had begun to settle. The rivers still produced gold. The mines still attracted workers. The stories of sudden fortunes still circulated. But California was changing. What had once been a chaotic frontier filled with tents and temporary camps was becoming a permanent society. Roads connected growing towns. Banks financed businesses. Schools educated children. Government institutions became stronger. The dream that had brought thousands westward was evolving into something much larger. California was becoming a center of wealth and influence. Many people who arrived during the gold rush never became rich miners. Instead, they found opportunity in other ways. Some opened stores. Others established transportation companies. Many worked as builders, farmers, bankers, or merchants. Over time, these industries often proved more profitable than mining itself. One merchant who understood this reality was Collis P. Huntington. Like many ambitious men of the era, he recognized that California's future depended on transportation and trade. The state was growing rapidly, but it remained separated from the eastern United States by thousands of miles. Moving people and goods across the continent was still difficult and expensive. Many business leaders believed a solution was necessary. Their vision would eventually lead to one of the most important infrastructure projects in American history. Meanwhile, California's gold continued flowing eastward. Banks shipped millions of dollars worth of precious metal across the country. The impact was enormous. Gold strengthened the American economy. Businesses gained access to more capital. Investments increased. Economic activity expanded. California's mines helped fuel national growth. At the same time, political tensions across the United States continued worsening. Arguments over slavery became increasingly bitter. Compromises that once seemed effective were beginning to fail. Northern and southern states disagreed on fundamental issues. Trust declined. Hostility increased. By the mid-1850s, the wild excitement of the early gold rush had begun to settle. The rivers still produced gold. The mines still attracted workers. The stories of sudden fortunes still circulated. But California was changing. What had once been a chaotic frontier filled with tents and temporary camps was becoming a permanent society. Roads connected growing towns. Banks financed businesses. Schools educated children. Government institutions became stronger. The dream that had brought thousands westward was evolving into something much larger. California was becoming a center of wealth and influence. Many people who arrived during the gold rush never became rich miners. Instead, they found opportunity in other ways. Some opened stores. Others established transportation companies. Many worked as builders, farmers, bankers, or merchants. Over time, these industries often proved more profitable than mining itself. One merchant who understood this reality was Collis P. Huntington. Like many ambitious men of the era, he recognized that California's future depended on transportation and trade. The state was growing rapidly, but it remained separated from the eastern United States by thousands of miles. Moving people and goods across the continent was still difficult and expensive. Many business leaders believed a solution was necessary. Their vision would eventually lead to one of the most important infrastructure projects in American history. Meanwhile, California's gold continued flowing eastward. Banks shipped millions of dollars worth of precious metal across the country. The impact was enormous. Gold strengthened the American economy. Businesses gained access to more capital. Investments increased. Economic activity expanded. California's mines helped fuel national growth. At the same time, political tensions across the United States continued worsening. Arguments over slavery became increasingly bitter. Compromises that once seemed effective were beginning to fail. Northern and southern states disagreed on fundamental issues. Trust declined. Hostility increased. The nation appeared to be moving toward a dangerous confrontation. In California, many residents watched these developments with concern. Although the state was geographically distant from Washington, it could not escape national politics. Its status as a free state influenced the balance of power in Congress. Its growing economy increased its importance. Its future became linked to the future of the Union itself. During these years, countless immigrants continued arriving. The gold rush had transformed California into one of the most diverse regions in America. Chinese communities expanded. European immigrants established neighborhoods. Latin American influences remained strong. People from around the world contributed to California's development. However, diversity did not guarantee equality. Many immigrant groups faced discrimination. Chinese workers, in particular, encountered increasing hostility. Despite their hard work and contributions, they often faced unfair laws and prejudice. Their experiences reflected broader social tensions that accompanied California's rapid growth. Still, opportunity remained powerful. The state attracted dreamers, entrepreneurs, workers, adventurers, inventors. Many believed California represented the future. In some ways, they were right. Technological innovation accelerated. Agriculture expanded dramatically. Commerce flourished. The state's economy became increasingly sophisticated. Mining itself also evolved. Early prospectors had relied on simple tools. Now large-scale operations dominated many regions. Engineers developed new techniques. Companies invested significant resources. Mining camps transformed into industrial sites. One controversial method became known as hydraulic mining. Powerful streams of water blasted entire hillsides apart. The process exposed gold deposits hidden beneath layers of earth. Production increased dramatically. Mining companies earned substantial profits. Yet hydraulic mining carried serious consequences. The environment suffered. Rivers became clogged with sediment. Farmland downstream experienced damage. Communities complained. The conflict between economic growth and environmental protection had begun long before modern debates. Even in the 1850s and 1860s, Californians were grappling with these issues. As prosperity expanded, some individuals achieved extraordinary wealth. A few became millionaires. Their fortunes allowed them to influence politics, business, and society. Luxury homes appeared. Banks expanded operations. Investment opportunities multiplied. The gold rush had created a new economic elite. Yet not everyone shared in this prosperity. Many workers still struggled. Some miners lived in poverty. Labor disputes occasionally emerged. The gap between rich and poor became increasingly visible. California reflected both the opportunities and inequalities of rapid economic growth. Then, in 1861, the crisis that many feared finally arrived. The United States descended into the American Civil War. The nation split apart. Southern states formed the Confederacy. The Union fought to preserve the country. Battles erupted across the continent. Hundreds of thousands of lives would eventually be lost. California was far from the major battlefields. No massive armies clashed in its valleys. No famous battles occurred in its cities. Yet the state played a vital role. California remained loyal to the Union. Its gold became one of the Union's greatest financial advantages. The precious metal flowing from California helped support the Northern War effort. It strengthened government finances. It contributed to economic stability during a period of immense uncertainty. Many historians believe California's wealth significantly aided the Union's ability to sustain the war. The gold rush, which had begun as a local discovery beside a river, was now influencing the outcome of a national conflict. The connection was remarkable. A few glittering flakes discovered by James W. Marshall in 1848 had helped transform America's economy and strengthen the Union during its greatest crisis. As the Civil War continued, California kept growing. Agriculture expanded further. Trade increased. Transportation networks improved. The state's development did not stop. In fact, many leaders believed an even greater transformation was approaching. They envisioned a railroad stretching across the continent. A railroad that would connect California directly to the eastern United States. Such a project seemed almost impossible. The distances were enormous. The mountains were formidable. The costs would be staggering. Yet ambitious entrepreneurs believed it could be done. If successful, the railroad would unite the nation in ways never before imagined. And it would change California forever. The age of isolated frontier settlements was ending. A new era of connection, industry, and national power was about to begin. As the American Civil War raged in the East, another historic struggle was unfolding in the West. It was not a battle between armies. It was a battle against distance, mountains, weather, and engineering challenges. For years, Americans had dreamed of connecting the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. The nation stretched across an enormous continent. Travel between California and the eastern states remained slow, dangerous, and expensive. Even after the gold rush, crossing the continent could take months. Many believed this situation could not continue forever. The growing importance of California made a faster connection essential. Business leaders wanted it. Politicians supported it. Settlers demanded it. The answer seemed obvious: build a railroad. But imagining such a project was much easier than actually building it. The proposed route would cross deserts, rivers, valleys, and some of the most difficult mountain terrain in North America. Many experts doubted it could be done. Others worried about the enormous cost. Yet a small group of determined businessmen refused to give up. Among them was Leland Stanford. Along with several partners, Stanford became one of the driving forces behind the effort to build a transcontinental railroad. Their vision was ambitious. Steel rails would stretch across thousands of miles. Trains would carry passengers, supplies, and information faster than ever before. California would no longer feel isolated. The nation would become more connected. In 1862, during the Civil War, Congress passed the Pacific Railway Act. The law provided support for railroad construction. It represented one of the most significant infrastructure decisions in American history. Work soon began. The task was immense. The western section of the railroad would be built eastward from California. Almost immediately, workers encountered difficulties. The greatest obstacle was the Sierra Nevada mountains. These mountains had challenged travelers for generations. Now engineers had to figure out how to drive a railroad through them. Steep slopes, deep snow, and solid granite created constant problems. Progress was slow. Explosives were used to carve tunnels through rock. Workers spent months completing short sections of track. Accidents were common. Conditions were often dangerous. Yet construction continued. A large portion of the labor force consisted of Chinese workers. Thousands of immigrants from China accepted jobs on the railroad. They performed some of the most difficult and dangerous work. They blasted tunnels, moved heavy materials, worked in extreme weather, faced constant risks. Despite discrimination and unfair treatment, they became essential to the success of the project. Without their contributions, the railroad might never have been completed. Winter in the Sierra Nevada was especially brutal. Snowstorms buried camps. Avalanches threatened workers. Temperatures dropped dramatically. Some tunnels required years of effort. Yet the workers endured. Every completed mile brought the dream closer to reality. Meanwhile, construction also advanced from the eastern side of the continent. Another company pushed westward across the Great Plains. The race was on. The two railroads would eventually meet somewhere in the middle. As track expanded, excitement spread throughout the nation. Newspapers followed progress closely. Americans understood that they were witnessing history. The railroad promised to change everything. Travel times would shrink dramatically. Communication would improve. Trade would expand. Entire regions would become more accessible. For California, the benefits would be enormous. Farmers could send products eastward more efficiently. Businesses could receive supplies more quickly. Families separated by vast distances could travel more easily. The state would become more closely connected to the rest of the country. At last, after years of effort, the historic moment arrived. On May 10, 1869, the two railroad lines met at Promontory Summit. A ceremonial golden spike was driven into the final section of track. Crowds celebrated. Telegraph messages carried the news across the nation. The dream had become reality. The first transcontinental railroad was complete. The achievement transformed America. Journeys that once required months could now be completed in days. Goods moved faster. Businesses expanded. Migration increased. The railroad accelerated economic growth throughout the West. California benefited enormously. The gold rush had helped create the conditions that made the railroad possible. Now the railroad would help shape California's future. New towns emerged along the tracks. Agricultural regions expanded. Trade networks grew stronger. The state's economy became more diverse. Mining remained important, but it was no longer the only source of prosperity. Agriculture flourished. Manufacturing developed. Banking expanded. California was evolving into a modern economic powerhouse. The impact reached far beyond economics. The railroad also changed culture. Ideas traveled more quickly. People from different regions interacted more often. The nation felt smaller, more connected, more unified. Yet not all consequences were positive. The railroad accelerated settlement across the West. Native American communities faced increasing pressure. Traditional lands were lost. Conflicts intensified. Many indigenous nations suffered tremendous hardships during this period. The same forces that created opportunity for some created tragedy for others. History rarely affects everyone equally. By the 1870s, the era of the original gold rush was fading into memory. Many mining camps had disappeared. Some became ghost towns. Others evolved into permanent communities. The rivers where prospectors once searched for gold no longer attracted the same crowds. The frenzy had ended. But its legacy remained everywhere. California's population had exploded. Cities had grown. Businesses had prospered. Transportation networks connected the continent. The state had become one of the most important parts of the nation. Few events in American history had produced such dramatic change in such a short period of time. What began with a few flakes of gold beside a river had transformed a frontier into a powerhouse. And yet, California's story was far from over. New industries would emerge. New fortunes would be built. New dreamers would arrive seeking opportunity. The spirit that fueled the gold rush would continue shaping California for generations. But before that future arrived, the state would experience another transformation, one that would make it a global symbol of innovation, ambition, and possibility. By the 1870s, the roaring excitement of the California gold rush had largely faded. The days when thousands of prospectors rushed into rivers with pans and shovels were becoming history. Many of the famous mining camps were quieter now. Some had disappeared completely. Weathered buildings stood abandoned. Empty streets echoed with memories of dreams won and lost. Travelers who visited these former boomtowns often found themselves surrounded by silence. Only a generation earlier, those same places had been filled with noise, laughter, arguments, hope, and desperation. Yet, while the gold rush itself was ending, its impact was only beginning to reveal its true magnitude. California had changed forever. The state's population had grown from a small frontier community into hundreds of thousands of residents. Cities expanded. Businesses flourished. Infrastructure improved. The economy diversified. Gold had been the spark. Everything that followed was the fire. One of the biggest changes occurred in agriculture. California's fertile valleys proved capable of producing enormous quantities of food. Farmers discovered opportunities that rivaled those found in mining. Wheat fields expanded. Fruit orchards multiplied. Vast ranches spread across the landscape. The state's climate allowed agricultural production on a remarkable scale. Soon California was becoming known not only for gold but also for food. Railroads made this transformation possible. Fresh products could now reach distant markets. Farmers who once sold locally could sell nationally. Economic growth accelerated. Entire communities prospered. At the same time, cities continued developing. Among them, Los Angeles began its rise. Although still relatively small compared with modern standards, Los Angeles was growing steadily. New settlers arrived. Businesses opened. Transportation links improved. The city possessed enormous potential. Few people could imagine that it would someday become one of the largest cities in the world. Meanwhile, San Francisco remained the dominant urban center of the West Coast. Its banks financed major projects. Its harbor connected America to global trade routes. Its entrepreneurs pursued ambitious ventures. The city became a symbol of opportunity and innovation. Visitors from around the world admired its energy. California increasingly looked toward the Pacific Ocean rather than solely toward the East Coast. Trade with Asia expanded. Ships carried goods across vast distances. Immigration continued. New cultures enriched the state's identity. California was becoming an international crossroads. The influence of Chinese immigrants remained especially significant. Despite facing discrimination and legal restrictions, Chinese communities contributed enormously to California's economy. They worked in agriculture. They built businesses. They helped construct railroads. They created vibrant neighborhoods. Their resilience became an important part of California's story. Yet challenges persisted. Racial prejudice remained widespread. Opportunities were not distributed equally. Many immigrant communities struggled against unfair treatment. The growth of California was impressive, but it was not without conflict. At the same time, technology was beginning to reshape American society. Inventors introduced new tools and machines. Communication improved. Industry expanded. The United States was entering an era of rapid modernization. California embraced these changes enthusiastically. The spirit that had drawn prospectors westward, the belief that bold risks could produce extraordinary rewards, continued influencing the state's culture. People still came seeking opportunity. The opportunities were simply different now. Instead of searching rivers for gold, entrepreneurs searched for business ideas. Instead of prospecting in mountains, investors explored new industries. The frontier mentality survived, even as the frontier itself disappeared. Many historians believe this cultural attitude became one of California's greatest strengths. The state attracted dreamers, innovators, risk-takers, people willing to attempt what others considered impossible. This pattern would repeat itself again and again throughout California's history. The gold rush had established a tradition of ambition. As the 19th century approached its end, California's influence continued growing. Population increased. Wealth expanded. Political importance rose. The state that had once been a distant territory was now a major force within the United States. Tourists also began arriving. They came not to mine gold but to see California's beauty. The Sierra Nevada mountains, the Pacific coastline, the giant redwood forests. The state's natural wonders attracted visitors from around the world. California's reputation expanded beyond economics. It became associated with adventure, beauty, and possibility. At the same time, memories of the gold rush entered American folklore. Stories of prospectors became legends. Books were written. Newspapers celebrated historical anniversaries. Children learned about brave fortune-seekers who crossed deserts and mountains in search of wealth. Some stories were accurate. Others became exaggerated over time. Yet together they helped create one of America's most enduring myths. The image of the determined prospector became part of the national identity. It symbolized perseverance, optimism, individual ambition, the belief that success could be achieved through courage and hard work. Whether entirely true or not, the legend proved powerful. By the late 1800s, California was no longer merely a state transformed by gold. It had become a symbol. A place where people believed extraordinary things could happen. A place where reinvention seemed possible. A place where the future often arrived first. This reputation would attract new generations. Farmers, inventors, filmmakers, engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs. Each would contribute to California's next great chapters. The gold rush had begun with a discovery in a river. But its ultimate legacy was something much larger. It created a culture of possibility. A culture that would continue shaping California long after the last major gold strikes faded into history. And in the 20th century, that culture would help transform California into one of the most influential places on Earth. As the 20th century dawned, few places on Earth embodied ambition quite like California. More than 50 years had passed since James W. Marshall noticed tiny flakes of gold sparkling in the waters of the American River. The mining camps of 1849 were mostly gone. Many prospectors had passed away. The frantic rush for gold had become history. Yet the consequences of that discovery continued shaping the future. California was no longer a frontier. It was becoming a powerhouse. Railroads linked it to the rest of the nation.